written by Thornton Wilder. In it, you will see Miss Lenehan, Mr. Carroll, Mr. Ball, Miss Gulati, Mr. Johnson, the Goddards, and many others. The name of the town is Grover's Corners. Latitude 71 degrees 35 minutes, longitude 28 degrees 34 minutes. The time is just before dawn. The sky is beginning to show some streaks of light over in the east there, just beyond our mountain. Morning star always gets awful bright just before it is to go, doesn't it? Well, I better show you how our town lies. Up here is Main Street. Right there is the railway station. Tracks go that way. Across the tracks, some Polish families, Canadian families. Here's our Congregational Church. Presbyterians across the way. Methodist and Unitarian are right there. Baptist is down the aisle by the river. Catholic is way beyond the tracks. Right here is our town hall and post office combined. Jail's in the basement. Along here is a row of stores. Banker Cartwright, our richest citizen, lives in that big White House up on the hill. And there's Mrs. Morgan's drugstore and the grocery store. About everyone in town manages to look into one of those two stores at least once a day. Right there's the high school. Public school's farther over still, about 8:45 mornings, 12 o'clock noon times, 3 o'clock afternoons. Everyone can hear shouting and screaming from those schoolyards. This is our doctor's house, Doc Gibbs. Here's some scenery for those of you who feel they need scenery. And this is Mrs. Gibbs' garden. Corn, peas, beans, hollyhock, heliotrope, and a whole lot of burdock. Back then, our newspaper came out twice a week, the Grover's Corners Sentinel. This is our editor's house, Editor Webb. This is Mrs. Webb's garden, just like Mrs. Gibbs, only she's got some sunflowers in there too. And right here's a big butternut tree. Nice town. Nobody very remarkable ever came out of it, far as we know. Oldest tombs in the cemetery say about 1670, 1680. Bunches of Gibbses and Herseys and Cartwrights. Same names that are around here now. Well, as I said, it's about dawn. The only lights in town are over in Polish Town, where a mother's just given birth to twins. And the Crowell House, where Joe Jr. is getting ready to deliver the paper. There. The 5:45. Well, there's Doc Gibbs coming up Main Street now, and there's his wife coming downstairs to make breakfast. Thank you very much, Professor. Now, it's later in the day. There's sort of an early afternoon buzz and calm in the town. Doc Gibbs is in his office, tapping people and making them go, ah, and Mr. Webb is cutting his own lawn. You know, 1 in 10 men thinks it's a privilege to cut his own lawn. Oh no, it's later than I thought. The children are coming home from school already. I think now is a good time to tell you that the Cartwright interests have begun building a bank in Grover's Corners. And they've asked a friend of mine what they think they should put in the cornerstone for people 1,000 years from now to dig up. Of course, we're putting in a copy of the New York Times, copy of the Sentinel, the Bible, and the Constitution, and a couple of William Shakespeare's best plays. So, what do you think, folks? What do you think we should put in there for people 1,000 years from now to dig up? You know, I think I'm going to get a copy of this play put in there. Yes, that way people 1,000 years from now know what we were like. In our living, in our growing up, in our marrying, and in our dying. 3 years have gone by. Yes, the sun's come up over 1,000 times. Rain and snow has brought the dirt down on the mountains just a bit more, and summers and winters have cracked the mountains just a bit more. Nature's been pushing and contriving in other ways too. a number of young people fell in love and got married. Most everyone in the world gets married. You know what I mean? Seems everybody's climbing in their graves married. Hardly ain't any different in our town. So, it's 3 years later, just after our high school commencement. That's the time most of our young people jump up and get married. Seems as soon as they've passed their final examinations, they see themselves fit for marriage. So, it's early morning, only. This time it's been raining. It's been pouring and thundering. I mean, all yesterday on Main Street, it was coming down like curtains being blown along. Both Mrs. Gibbs' garden and Mrs. Webb's garden drenched. It's going to start again any minute. And there's the 5:45. And there's Mrs. Webb and Mrs. Gibbs coming downstairs to make breakfast as if it were an ordinary day. Now, I don't have to tell my ladies in the audience that these women they see before them, both of these ladies have cooked 3 meals a day, raised 2 children apiece, one of them for 20 years, one of them for 40, kept houses cleaned, kept the kids clean and fed, and not a single nervous breakdown.
Get up, Lassie.
And there's Howie Newsom coming to deliver the milk, and Sid Crowell going to deliver the paper like her brother before. Now, I have to interrupt again here. You see, we want to know how this all began, this wedding. This plan has spent a lifetime together. How do such things begin? Now, I'm going to have Emily and George show you the conversation they had when they first knew that, as the saying goes, they were meant for one another. But before that, I want you to try and remember for me what it was like to have been very young. And particularly the days when you were first in love. When you were like a blind man walking the streets and you didn't quite know what street you were on and you didn't quite know what you were hearing. Will you try and remember that for me? Please? So, school had just gotten out. George had just been elected president of the junior class, and given it's June, that means he'll be president all senior year. And Emily had just been elected secretary and treasurer. And I can't tell you how important that is. There are a lot of things that go on during a wedding. There are a lot of thoughts that go on during a wedding. We can't get them all into one wedding, naturally, and especially not one here in Grover's Corners, where they're awfully plain and short. This here is a good wedding, but even at a good wedding, there's a whole lot of confusion that goes on way down deep in people's minds, and, well, we thought we ought to get that in our play, too. 9 years have gone by. Gradual changes in Grover's Corners. Let's see. Everyone locks their doors now at night. Ain't been no burglars yet, but everyone's heard of them. You'd be surprised, though. At a whole, things don't change much around here. This is certainly an important part of Grover's Corners. It's a hilltop. A windy hilltop. Lots of sun, lots of sky, often lots of moon and stars. You come up here on a fine day and you can see a range of hills and the towns that surround it. Mountain laurel, lilacs, yes, awful blue they are. Over here are the old stones, 1670, 1680. On a nice day, summer people will come along here and laugh at the funny names on the tombstones. Wherever you come near in the human race, there's layers and layers of nonsense. Over here are the Civil War vets, iron flags on their graves, had a notion that the Union ought to be kept together, but they hadn't seen more than 50 miles of it themselves. All they knew was a name, friends. The United States of America. The United States of America. they went and died about it. This here's the new part of the cemetery. Here's your friend, Mrs. Gibbs, and Simone Stimson, the choir director at the Congregational Church, you remember? And Mr. Soames, who enjoyed the wedding so much. And, oh, that's right, Wally, Editor Webb's boy. His appendix burst on a Boy Scout trip. Yes. An awful lot of sorrow was sort of quieted up down here. People just wild with grief bring their relatives up on this hill. And we all know how it is. With time and rain and snow. Well, we're just all glad they're in a nice place, and we're coming up here ourselves when our fit's over. No. There are some things we know, but we don't take them out and look at them very often. We all know that something is eternal. And it ain't houses, and it ain't names, and it ain't even the stars. Yes. Everyone in their bones knows that something is eternal. And that something has to do with human beings. All the greatest people who ever lived have been telling us that for thousands and thousands of years, and yet you'd be surprised at how many people are constantly losing hold of it. Well, you know as well as I do that the dead don't stay interested in us living for very long. Slowly, slowly, they lose hold of the things they have on earth. The pleasures they had, the pain they suffered, and the people they loved. They get weaned away from earth. That's how I put it. Weaned away. And, well, they sit here, and the earth part of them burns out. They grow indifferent to what's happening in Grover's Corners. They're waiting. Yes, they're waiting for something they feel is coming, something big, something important. Aren't they waiting for that eternal part of them to come out clear? Now, some of the things they're going to say might hurt your feelings, but that's just the way it is. I mean, things like money and miser, enemy and enemy, mother and daughter, those things just grow sort of pale around here. And what's left when your memory's gone? Your identity, Mrs. Smith? Well, there's some live people. There's Joe Stoddard, supermising a new-made grave, and there's a Grover's Corners boy who left town to go out west. Most everyone's asleep in Grover's Corners. There are a few lights on. It's cleared up. And the stars doing their old crisscross journeys in the sky. You know, scholars haven't settled the matter yet, but they seem to think there's nothing up there. Just chalk. Fire. Only this one's straining away. This one's straining away all the time to try and make something of itself. The strain is so bad that every 16 hours we have to lie down and get some rest. Hmm. 11 o'clock at Grover's Corners. You get a good rest too. Good night.